So that was quite a tough act to follow. I probably should have opted for the middle spot in retrospect, but we'll go with this anyway. I've got probably a little more a talk on the softer side. So kind of onboarding. I think the topic of interviewing for software engineering roles is like beaten to death, and kind of negotiating salary and like questions that you're asked, the whole cracking the coding interview, that sort of thing is absolutely done to death. But no one really kind of talks about what happens afterwards or what happens in the first month of a new gig. So I kind of wanted to cover that today. So I have a few tips. I actually have 10 tips. So I'm Sam. I recently started as a senior software engineer at Practice Fusion, which is an electronic medical record company. We're based in San Francisco. I'm remote. It's pretty sweet. I have started new jobs this year twice. Long story, but I have a bit of experience with the whole onboarding process. I originally started in tech as a user experience designer and turned into a user interface engineer. I specialize in data viz. I've done a lot of work in kind of aggregating healthcare data, and my last role was with an analytics product in healthcare. I do a lot of work in continuous integration and testing on front-end tool chains, and health tech is kind of my specialty. I'm sorry this talk has no code, but I'm not Canadian, so I'm not sorry.
We love normal once in a while.
And my phone's locked me out of my notes. Here we go.
Not actually, sorry, I'm not really.
Yeah, so originally a New Zealander, that's the accent. Anyway, tip number 1, do your homework. I think this is an obvious one, but going into a new role, and this should be even before the interview phase, you should know the product of the company that you're interviewing for, or you're starting a new role at. You should know their competitors. You should know what your outputs are. You should also know who the players are in the market and who the players are in the company. If you can't tell me your CEO's name when you walk in the door of a new job, you're probably doing something a little wrong. Know the wider people in your team, know who's going to be responsible for you. Pretty straightforward stuff. Know your team. LinkedIn stalking is a thing. You should be able to LinkedIn stalk your entire team and make sure that you know their backgrounds and know who your seniors are. Like, you can get a kind of gist of who's got experience with what. Is your team cross-functional? Is your team strictly front-end? Is your team strictly back-end? There's different kind of org makeups, there's different hierarchies, there's different strategies for that. And so getting a handle on how your team functions is really important. Tip number 3, get communicating. So I hate Slack. Sorry, I need to rephrase that. I hate overuse of Slack, and I think it's become pervasive in a lot of the companies I've seen and worked with, and all these kind of like little side Slack channels that are tech meetups. Your one including. It gets very distracting, but different teams have different cultures around Slack and communication tools, and so you should get to know the norms of those. What is the processes around meetings? Does your team have focus time? Does your team when is stand up? When is grooming? What are those kind of things? This whole notes on my phone isn't very helpful. How are meetings structured? I know some companies are very formal and require you to have an agenda. Do you know how to structure an agenda? Do you know how to take notes? Those kind of things. Do you follow up? Number 4, know what success looks like. I had a company, I'm not going to name them, but I asked my manager on the second day, I was like, what is it going to take me to be successful in this role? And he couldn't tell me. So, I think it's really important, like as a professional in any industry, not necessarily just software engineering, to know what success in your role looks like. And so getting an answer around that, getting a plan, aligning your personal goals and what you want to do with your career with the company's goals in terms of what they're producing is really important. I think really like what we tried to do in my last company was set 1, 2, and 3 month targets in terms of being aligned with the product, getting the right education around kind of domain and market specific needs, and also like how you're producing or how you're pushing code. This one is a very conditional one. Read the documentation. I say conditional because most people I've talked to, especially in kind of like startup environments, there is no docs, right? Like your docs are code, or your docs are whatever someone in the next kind of pod is talking about. So this goes hand in hand with the next one, which is write the documentation. So you, as a new hire, and I've done this in both of these last 2 roles, is write onboarding docs, write the processes of getting a development environment set up, write how to, who to ask the questions around getting started with the system. And this goes hand in hand with kind of passing a baton. It's like your responsibility as a new person to say, ask all the questions, but also communicate, write them down, get them out there. This is really, this goes hand in hand with this, is work out the path for production. So I guess this comes back to interviewing a little bit, is like, one thing I always ask when I'm being interviewed, is, you know, they have that thing at the end of the interview, is, you've got any questions to ask? And I'm like, so how does my code go out? And they'll give you this kind of, you know, wishy-washy answer, and you won't actually work out that there is 5 manual steps, and there's only one guy who has the SSH creds to production until you actually get on the job. So work out how exactly, from your commit in your local environment, your code is going to get out there into the hands of actual users. And go back and write those docs, because they probably aren't there. Or automate it even better. I think, and now we finally get to you actually doing work, but I think the best way to start as a software engineer on a gig is to write tests. Writing tests is the best way to kind of get a feel for the code base and get around. You don't necessarily need to know all of the domain stuff. You really can dig into what's happening and increase coverage, and actually, tests add value. Write good tests. I'm not going to tell you what a good test is. You should probably go and do that research yourself. But write some tests. The next step is be visible. This is especially true as a remote employee, I think. But in any context, if you are forgotten or sidelined or not vocal in meetings, you will feel the effects of that. And so as a new person, don't cause too much friction, but also be seen. And the final of my very quick-fire 10 is ask for help. You are hired for a reason. You are valuable. So don't feel like there are stupid questions. I haven't seen a perfect software engineering organization. And I think that, you should be comfortable asking for help, especially when you're getting started. Cool, that's me.
So I agree with everything except the writing tests. I think.
Do you write JavaScript?
Those are important, right? Like the tests are important.
Yeah.
I think what is really going to put you on a map when you're first being onboarded as a software engineer is actually fixing bugs. Especially if you actually fix a critical bug that has been a showstopper for quite some time for the business.
That's a very
Depends on the team and context.
So that's a very good point, but I would say you write tests around that bug before you fix that bug.
I mean, but that's obvious, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You're not going to deploy something that you haven't tested and then you haven't documented as having tested properly. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, but if you actually want to stand out as the guy who actually, because I've employed engineers before.
Yep.
And the very first thing I do is I say, okay, you know what, this shit is fucked up. Fix it.
No, I agree with you entirely.
And then what
the
they do-
corresponding test with that fix, and then you will be extra hero.
Well, but that's the point, right? But the most, like from a business perspective, what matters is it doesn't matter what your decorating is about, right?
Yeah.
What matters is whether you fix it, deliver, and you close that bug off. Don't.
Right.
I mean, it's obvious. Like from a software engineer perspective, you actually need to, like test it and document it.
Yeah, I think you are right there, and I think diving in and getting into bugs is a very valuable thing you can do without much context, right? Like you can get an error message, and one of the things that I think is less valued or less kind of emphasized is debugging and getting into the weeds of like where a problem is actually happening and some root cause analysis and stuff, right? Like that.
At that point in time, you start talking with other members, right? Like of the team,
Right,
like
exactly.
senior, right, so you actually go into the visibility thing.
Right, and a lot of your value when you're new is fresh eyes on a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, and you should emphasize that.
Find a niche and be really fucking good at it.
Indeed, Matt.
Hey, I love the question, what does success look like in this role? And I'm just curious if you were like reversing the situation, what's the best possible answer somebody could give you, or what answer could you give someone else, whichever one of those?
I guess the best things that I've seen are kind of frameworks in terms of how you would move forward in a career, right? It's like, what does my progression look like from this role? I'm a senior software engineer. Can I go to a team lead role? Can I go into a more of an individual contributor, like a senior level role? Can I move sideways in a product or whatever else it might be? And that's definitely more of a mature organization kind of thing. Startups, obviously, you can do whatever you want to an extent.
Man, why are those things attractive to you as success? Like pieces?
I guess personally, it's about like how I can grow and where I'm going with my stuff. Yeah.
Why do you hate Slack?
Why do I hate Slack? People abuse it. Like you just get notification fatigue, I think. Yeah, but then so here's my problem, right? You turn it off and then you go back an hour later and you've got 50,000 unread messages and you miss everything that's actually important.
Yeah, but
Yeah. And it's companies that let you at-channel the entire company. That Anyway.
I don't know, I'm with Zach. Give me an alternative.
Exactly.
Round of applause for Sam, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Let's go with that.